Well, that's not good. This is my trusty orange work chair. This came to me second hand, as most things do, and the fabric has just worn out. It's just gone thin and worn through, so we need to sort out a new cover for this. I could just copy exactly what's here, make exactly the same cover. That's one way of doing it. You can just get fabric and sew it on top by hand. I want something removable that I can put through the wash for one practical reason, which is this sort of thing. This is ink. Because I sometimes work in paint and ink, I do sometimes spill things. Can't be helped. So I want a cover I can take off and put through the washing machine. If I make a pattern for a removable cover, then I can make more than one cover, and that then means that if I've got one in the wash, I've still got one on the chair. I'm going to make the pattern by draping this fabric, which is the old curtains from the room, onto the chair itself. For the fabric, we're going to use the top that we chopped off these curtains. Because it's hard wearing, I have it, saves it going in the bin. And then the other fabric we're using is the leftover Ferengi fabric. I want to add a little bit of detail to this. I don't have to, but I thought it would be nice if the chair cover matched the curtains. So these stripe details on the curtain I will scale, and I'm just going to do it on the back of the chair. I'm not going to do it on the seat base. That's a hard wearing area. This is not a hard wearing fabric. And that's something to bear in mind. If you're making a cover for anything, pay attention to where your hard wearing areas are. On chairs like this, it's generally the whole of the seat base where your bum goes. But it tends to also be this edge here where your legs are. Now you can see on this one there's like a bit of a dip there and a bit of a dip there. That's where my legs are, and you can also see the piping showing through the orange because they're your hard wear areas. If you've got fabric covered arms, this one doesn't, but if you do, your hard wearing area there tends to be the leading edge where you grab it with your hand and the back edge where your elbow goes. Sometimes you'll see on chairs with sort of plush velour type fabrics, you'll see a shiny spot where the elbow is. And then your other hard wearing areas is the corners and along the back. This is usually because this is where you grab the chair to move it, and because you're constantly handling it, it wears through the fabric. So unless you're putting contrast details in to make the cover more hard wearing, avoid those areas with a delicate fabric like this patterned one here, because it will wear through very quickly and a lot of your hard work will go to waste. To work out what you want for your cover, I'm doing this in one piece. Keep it as simple as possible. Just get your fabric and drape it as evenly as you can. Don't be tempted to tuck it in here unless you're doing two pieces. If you're doing a one piece like this, just let it conform to the shape of the piece of furniture and it will find its own shape as you put it in. On this one I do want it to go around the back because I want the top to slide on and then the bottom I'm going to do with a drawstring, because that's one of the best ways with a seat like this to actually just get the bottom in without worrying about special fastenings or fixings. Once you've got the chair draped like this, the next thing to do is pin these sides, because that will be one seam. There's very few seams on this. You have one seam that runs down here, a channel that runs around the bottom of the seat, and that's really it. with everything pinned in place, as you can see here, that effectively gives you your seam line, but you want to make sure you don't pull this super tight. So this follows the curve of the seat, but it's not like drum tight. There's a little bit of looseness there. This is something you figure out as you go along. At the back you can see, again, I've not pulled it really tight. The lines are still fairly straight there. It's just pulling a little bit here. So I think one of the pins is just slightly out of alignment. What I'll do to make this a bit easier, now that I've got the rough shape pinned in, is we cut off the excess fabric, and then we can adjust all of the pin marks and just get everything tweaked so that these crease lines and that sort of thing come out. Bit of patience required, but you do get there. With all the loose fabric trimmed off down the sides, it also allowed me to correct the back. And what was happening is I've got more fabric on this side than this side, so it's just dragging it over ever so slightly, and that's why you see, just from here you can see the point where it fans up, and it's just the weight of the fabric pulling it. You can also see it's fairly loose at the back. This is because the back of this chair is shaped, so it's quite wide at the top and it narrows in. I will now take the excess off the sides, which will help again with some of the draping here, because we want it to clear the handles, but I don't want it to drag on the floor. You can see as you cut that out, that now clears the arm. I've left a little bit extra because we'll need a seam there, but that means that this hangs slightly nicer around the bottom. I can also cut this little excess tab off the edge. I'm looking at this and I might not actually need the drawstring. Might work well without it. We'll see, I might change my mind. I'm cutting this just a bit oversized so I've got seam allowance. Yeah, I think that will work better. So this adds a little bit of complication, but not too much. It means that we're using two pieces instead of one piece to make the cover. I think it'll look slightly better when it's done. And this back's too long, so we'll chop that short. Yeah, so you'll have where the back finishes just here, and you have the sides, you'll have a strip, almost what I've cut off there, that just goes around. And that would be quite handy, because what I can do is, if I double this piece up, that also serves as a channel for putting the cord through, putting the tension on the bottom. I'm just refining some of the edges here to get the shape as it should be. Okay, that's now all trimmed down so that it's the actual size I need it to be. So we can basically regard this as the main pattern piece with the seam allowances included. The only thing that I will do is, once I've taken this off the chair, fold it in half and just make sure everything is mirrored, because the chair is mirrored, and it just tidies up all your edges. For doing the skirt on this, all I need to do is measure this height here and then measure all the way around the seat base and cut a rectangle to that shape, which is why I'm not making a pattern piece of that out of this fabric, because there's not a great deal of point doing that on the chair, but I will do that off the chair. I've got plenty of fabric left over to do that with. Pattern all evened out and repinned. And you can see a lot of that pulling's disappeared. There is some drape here, that's just this fabric, that's the way it behaves. When you sit in the chair, it will actually pull this forwards a little bit and just tighten up, so it's not actually a bad thing having a little bit of that on the back. And the seat base looks nice and tidy, and of course as you sit down that pulls everything in. But that's why I didn't tuck it in at the back here, because you want all of this to be able to move a little bit, and that's what's going on here. The shape of the back means that this has got just a little bit of room in it. For measuring the section on the bottom here, the skirt that goes around the bottom of it, I just need to take a note of some measurements. I'm going to double it up for here. One, because the extra weight of fabric will help keep the seat where it is, but two, I can run a cord through it. So that's 4 inches. And then you go from the point where your seam is back here and just run your tape all the way around the base. And that's pretty much exactly 52 inches. So I know that this skirt needs to be 8 inches top to bottom and 52 inches on. And I'll make my mind up about that drawstring in a bit, because I'm still undecided. I don't think it's going to be needed. The design process, that's what this is. On the back of these original curtains is some blackout fabric. I was going to use this to line the whole cover, just to give it some extra toughness, but because of the way the curtains are done, it's not quite long enough. So instead, I've used one of the pieces doubled over, and I'm going to hand sew it onto the seam on the base. And this is actually surprisingly tough material, but it should mean that where all this high wear is happens here and not on the lining fabric itself. So this isn't a very tidy job, because it doesn't have to be. All I've done is I've taken the big oblong and then I've rolled the edge under to match the seam, and I'm just going to very coarsely whip stitch it straight through, and that'll be perfectly adequate for this. In the future, if I need to take it off, I can very easily, but I can't see why I'd have to. And since you'll no longer see the original cover, it doesn't really matter what it looks like. Sewing doesn't always have to be beautiful. Sometimes it just needs to do a job. These fabrics are all very grabby as well, so it's not much fun to do. It's going to take me a while. On the original seam here, what I'm doing is I'm going through where the stitch line is behind this section. This is basically a French seam, and then it'll just whip stitch round like this all the way around the edge and just hold this down. That's all it's for. It's just to hold this in place. It's not to give any strength or anything like that. It just stops this moving around. There we go. That's all done. This is ideal for this sort of repair work. It's not seen. The idea is just to stabilise it, protect the areas where they'd worn through, not spend too much time on it. I used a slightly thicker thread and just a very simple whip stitch, this would be perfectly adequate for what's happening. It'll also lend a bit of strength across the seat, so it's not going to squash and stretch out so much. And this will protect the cover, because anything that's inside here, any structure that's inside the seat cushion, isn't going to rub through onto the seat cover. One thing you learn early on with sewing is minimal wastage is good. And I guessed that these pieces were about the size I needed them to be. I hadn't realised how tight it would have been. You can see the main piece there folded in half, because it's mirrored, cut on the fold, and there's barely any fabric left over, which is perfect. That's what you want, which means I've got the maximum amount of use out of those curtains. This is all loosely pinned together, just working out the design. Originally I was going to do exactly like the curtains, have a really thick band in the middle and a thinner and a thinner. I've had to scale it down. I can't make these thin ones any thinner, they become too fiddly. So that was the smallest I could do. And I can fit 3 on the back, it looks right. Once I've got everything marked up, those will come around the back of the chair as well. My next task is a lot of careful laying out with the sewing here. Just getting this all sewn together. I'm not sure what I'm doing seam wise. I think some of the seams are going to be regular ones and some might be French seams. I might do the one around the seat base as a French seam because that's a high wear area, so it would benefit from it. We'll see. I'll see what material I'm working with when I get it on the machine. Got all the stripes sewn on, front and back. I'm hoping these line up on the sides. I'm not great at doing that, but we'll see. It'll be good enough, I'm sure. The next bit to do is deal with the skirt on the base, and the first thing I've done here is I've just marked where the centre is on the seat base piece and the skirt itself. If you work from the middle out to the back on both sides, it'll end up pinning much more evenly, and then when you sew it, it's a lot less hassle. I am going to French seam this one. I've got enough fabric to do it, and I think it's just going to be better for this particular seam. So I'm going to go round that, and then as I've done in other videos, if you check out any of the recent videos really, you'll see how French seams are done. I shan't cover it this time. That didn't go too badly. Corners are a bit fiddly, as corners often are, but turned out quite nice. It gives a really nice finish to the edge of the cushion as well. It looks a lot more professional than it really is. One seam to go, which is just this one here, which will run all the way down to the bottom. I'm just going to do this as a regular seam. I don't think there's any benefit to doing it any other way, and it'll make this top piece a little bit easier to sort out. Getting there. Last few bits and pieces all done now. Turned out there was enough space to put the drawstring through, and I think it'll work okay. I'm not entirely sure why this has decided to come unravelled, but it has, so I'll retwist that and just melt the end. Turn the hem for the bit at the back, which is just where it finishes at the bottom so you don't have a raw edge. And I've trimmed all of this on the inside, turned it out. The stripes match up moderately well. Another small modification I did on the chair is on these top corners with these little plastic things, and I've always disliked them. And since we've got a cover on, I just chop them off and then blanket stitch that closed, so I won't have these nubbins jabbing in me anymore. Let's get this fitted and show you how it looks. That didn't turn out too badly. The drawstring on the bottom was a good idea. It just helps tidy everything up, make it look a little bit better fitted. And while the stripes aren't perfect, they're good enough. Overall, I'm quite happy with that. And I've now got a pattern so I can make some more covers if I want them.